we're ruined. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were watching TV.
Nobody was looking forward to the Bitcoin episode of Futurama. The second dumbest thing you can do when relaunching a canceled TV show is to update it with topical humor. The first dumbest thing you can do is update it with humor that was topical 2 years ago. If you're doing a Bitcoin episode, you might as well do one on toilet paper hoarding. As it turns out, How the West Was 1010001 is my favorite episode of the new season, and probably ranks somewhere in my top 10 overall. It's not really about Bitcoin. It just uses that as a handy excuse to create a futuristic frontier town. You got the gold rush thing going on with the Bitcoin mining, and the town is low-tech because the electrical output is devoted entirely to crypto. The episode is mostly a string of riffs on the Western genre, with the robot saloon pianist with a player piano parts in his chest. Roberto shows up as an outlaw with a gun knife that he invented/stole, and there's this really neat three-dimensional shootout. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Bruno Bazzetto's Weston Soda, an animated film that could be argued as the first spaghetti western, being released after A Fistful of Dollars but having gone into production first. Bazzetto has said that he chose the Western genre because all the good fairy tales had already been taken by Disney. But the classic story of the handsome stranger who rides into town to defeat the greedy land baron, that's basically a fairy tale. This gets to the heart of what makes the Western so appealing from the creative end. The basic story arcs and character types are so well known that you're free to approach the genre however you like. You know how the first 20 years of computer animated movies were all like, what if bugs were people? What if cars were people? What if toys were people? And it would be all these riffs on something familiar and mundane, but with a cartoony spin.
This is kind of the holy grail when it comes to promotional items.
Cowboy tropes are so ingrained in pop culture that you can basically do the same thing within that genre. And even little kids who've never seen a Western will get it. They've heard the iconic melody from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. They know what it means when two guys stand in the middle of the street and stare each other down at 20 yards. The influence of dime novels on the Western film genre has been dramatically overstated. Pioneer storytelling has relatively little to do with the evolution of the Western movie. As I understand it, the early American film industry was situated on the East Coast. Thomas Edison owned the patent on movie cameras and would send his hired goons out to smash up the equipment and shut down production if you didn't pay him his cut. So filmmakers moved out to California, where Edison had less pull, and where you could run down to Mexico if someone did show up looking for their protection money. On the East Coast, they had been making crime films. In California, these same character types and tropes were adapted to a frontier setting. Crime bosses became land barons, detectives became sheriffs, and hired guns became hired guns. But, like with older guns, the cinematic Western isn't really rooted in any literary or oral tradition so much as it's rooted in the strengths and weaknesses of cinema itself. Real cowboy towns weren't built around one big spacious main street with clearly legible signs for the saloon and sheriff's office and livery. That's a cinematic invention because it makes it easier to track the action and frame nice-looking shots, and because it puts everything in walking distance to everything else. If you wanted, you could film an entire Western in a single wide shot without changing the script. And bounty hunting wasn't a full-time job. People didn't really have duels on Main Street, and if we're talking about the post-Civil War era, life in a frontier town was pretty boring.
You don't ever bring him in alive, now do you, Jake?
Not really.
Case in point, they had one shootout at the OK Corral, and they still won't shut up about it. Like, get over it, buddy. Anywho, given the opportunity to play on common tropes and build your own stylized approach to the setting, you'd think there'd be hundreds of animated Westerns, but it's kind of a skimpy genre. My theory is, at any point in time where they're really cranking Westerns out, be it classic Hollywood or the TV Westerns of the 50s and 60s or Italian Westerns, they tend to draw from a shared pool of resources. You can spot the same towns, saloon sets, costumes, props, and actors in dozens of movies. Animated films are generally built from scratch, more or less. So, where every new spaghetti Western helped to build momentum for the movement, making the next one easier to produce as they added more assets to the collection, every animated Western is basically starting over from nothing. You can track the rise and fall of the Italian Westerns by the condition of the sets, props, and costumes. The productions got more impressive towards the late 60s, and then everything fell into disrepair throughout the 70s, leading into the vaguely post-apocalyptic films like Kioma and California. And then the literally post-apocalyptic movies that would follow, when the westerns became unprofitable and Road Warrior clones were the new thing.
He did make it inside me, but like just barely. And the guy was super small, so I'm fine.
Conversatively, it's hard to find two animated westerns that even look the same. Even Lucky Luke looks completely different every time they relaunch the series. So it's kind of slim pickings out there if you want to watch cowboy cartoons, but on the upside, this means that the genre has never had the opportunity to fall into a rut. Every new entry has had to invent its own original take, and you've never watched an animated western and thought, same old shit. Actually, you've probably never watched an animated western in the first place. Except maybe Rango. I'll just say it right here. Rango's the best animated western movie. If you're just looking for one to watch and you haven't seen Rango, watch Rango. But while I'm here, I'll mention one I really like. Rocky and Hudson, Gay Cowboys, because how many chances am I going to get to talk about this movie? When people say that a movie like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is pointless or has no plot, they don't really know what they're talking about. These are movies that may be meandering, the stakes may be low, but there's a clear beginning, middle, and end, a driving purpose to the film. This isn't the case with Rocky and Hudson. The movie is mostly comprised of an aimless road trip that they seem to have embarked upon for no particular reason, ultimately winding up on a western set near the beach, where they goof around for a bit, and then their car sinks in the ocean, and that's the end of the movie. Or maybe there's more to it than that, I don't know. I don't speak whatever it is they speak in Brazil. The movie is just delightful to stare at. I guess it's not that relevant to what I was talking about, animated westerns playing on cowboy tropes, because it's not exactly a conventional western in any sense. But like I said, when else am I going to get a chance to bring it up? And I guess it's worth acknowledging that even in a genre as slim as the animated western, you've still got your oddballs and outliers.
3-6 Mafia, wild on tour, whooping these niggas and fucking these whores.
Bet you can't hit the subscribe button before this video ends.